All right, so let's just call this Sam. And we'll change the text. So that's a nod to Jetpack Joyride. So let's right-click on here, and we already started an action performed. So we'll come down there. So let's see whether the box is checked or not. So the checkbox is called Sam. We can say sam.isSelected. And that'll give us a Boolean, true or false. Now let's get rid of this first message. So if I run this, when I click it, it says true. When I unclick it, it says false. So you can read the status. But if you have multiple checkboxes in this case, or if you're dealing with radio buttons or things like that, we may not know which one has been chosen. In other words, we knew our checkbox was called Sam because we only have one checkbox to worry about. But with that, we'd have to write separate code for each box that you might check or uncheck, right? So here's a different option. So this action performed is passed an argument E. Okay, E is an object of type action event. And E comes with a variety of methods, including getSource. And getSource, it says, returns an object. Okay, that's the most general type of object. So if I say E.getSource, that should return Sam in this case, right? That particular checkbox that was checked. Which means E.getSource, I should be able to say, is selected and tell whether or not the box is checked or unchecked. But I'm getting an error here. Why am I getting an error? Because getSource is returning an object, and an object does not have an isSelected method. Okay, but I happen to know that this is not just an object, it's actually a checkbox, a J checkbox, which does have an isSelected method. So I need to cast this. So I'm going to basically say J checkbox, and I'm going to cast the object that I got back from source, and that'll get rid of my error. So now all of this is basically going to return Sam, and then I can call that object's isSelected method. So this will just show me my flag twice. All right. Let's look at the text field. So text field, again, right click, come down to add event handler, and let's play with keystrokes. So we have key pressed, key released, and key typed. So press is when you push the key, release is when you release the key. Typed is weird. I think the difference between pressed and typed has to do with auto repeat. It's one of the differences. But anyway, I'm just going to play with key released. And so when I let go of a key, I'm going to come into this set of code. And let's just do a print. So I'll do arg0.get, and there's all the things all the methods that start with GET. So I can get key code, I can get key character, I can get a bunch of other things. I'm going to get key code. And if I come over here into this text field and I hit something like a space bar, I get a 32. If I hit an A, I get a 65. If I hit an enter, I get a 10. So what do these key codes look like? They look like ASCII. But if I hit a shift A, as soon as I press a shift key and an A, and I release the A, I get a 65. Which was what I got when I pressed a regular A. And when I release the shift key I get a 16. And if I press and release Control, I get a 17. And if I press and release Alt, I get an 18. And those are not ASCII codes. So these are actual keyboard codes. Okay, so your keyboard, you know, there's a cross matrix of switches, and when you press a key, voltages go down, it senses, multiplexers, 250, all that stuff, and it figures out which key is pressed. And there's a number associated with the physical key that you're pressing. Now, the physical key A is linked to the code 65, which happens to be the ASCII code of A. When I hit the 1 key, that gives me a 49. That's the ASCII code for a 1. If I hold Shift and I hit the 1 key, I still get the ASCII code for 1. Because I did not hit the exclamation mark key, I hit the Shift key followed by the 1 key. That's the 1 key's code, that's the Shift key code. Okay, so key codes are a little strange. So what we probably want is the actual key character. And in this case, we're going to get an actual character back. So there's a little a, here's a Shift A, and so on. Now I pressed the Shift and released it, and I got this funny little non-printable character. Same thing with Control and Alt, and so on. And we're dealing with all of these nuances because when we're at the level of trapping an individual key event, we're doing very low-level processing. We may not need to be at that level. Okay, think about what you do in C. You say F gets, the person types, they hit backspace, they hit up arrows, they go get a cup of coffee, they come back, they say Control U to delete all that, type everything. You don't see any of that. When you hit Enter, your buffer gets filled with a set of strings that were finally what the person had typed, right? Here we're at the extreme other end of the spectrum. Every time that we can set it up so every time they touch a key or they release it, we're notified of that. And we can see exactly what they're doing. So you can tell how many times they make a typo and keep track of it or something, you know, raise their insurance rates maybe. So I'm hitting some backspaces, and it's acting like a backspace in my window, but it's sending a character 8, which prints out like that. So we could do some things in here, like this. So I can check this character, and if it's a 10, which is an Enter key, instead of printing out that keystroke, let's print out everything that's in that text box. So our text box was called, I don't even know what it was called. Did we give it a weird name? Sam was the, I don't know, but I've messed up my code here. Is it just a text field?
Is that something else?
Oh boy. We got bad stuff happening. Alright, so this is what I was trying to do yesterday. So I've introduced a syntax error because I was typing too fast. And so I've got a little red symbol here saying there's a syntax error. And when I go to my design window, it doesn't know what my window is supposed to look like. Because the way it draws this is by reverse engineering this. Every time you go to the design window, it analyzes your code. It figures out what your window should look like. So I've got a syntax error. It's not going to draw correctly. So I'm just going to put in my closing brace. That should fix my error. And that should get me back to my design window. So I want to make this bigger. And I want to give it a name. So what are we going to call the text field? Sarah. Sarah? Okay, that works for me. I'll make her lowercase because it's a variable. It's an object. Alright, so over here So Sarah dot, and as soon as I hit the dot, I get a list of all the methods that I can call. And the first method list is getText, which does what you would think. It gets you the text contained in the component. And let's put it inside angle brackets. And so every time we hit enter, we'll see what the text is. And let's do something else. Let's clear the text. You can set that to anything you want. So this is some text. I can correct my typos. And when I hit enter, it tells me what the string was and it clears out the text field. So now I've got something that's kind of working like fgets, right? I can type in here. I can, copy and paste and so on. Or whatever you want to do, right? So if you really want low-level control, you have it, right? But in general, we may not need to know every single keystroke that somebody hits, right? But we could put something in here, and if you hit a backspace, we could, exit or something. Or whatever you feel like.
You can remake your stack and queue.
Yeah.
In here.
Yeah, totally. All right, let's look at spinners, just because spinners are fun. So right-click in here, add event handler, and let's go to state changed. Now some of these are trial and error, right? So what's the right action to use to respond to some event? I don't know. You can read the documentation, but you can actually just mess around with it, right? You can go into different things like state changed and component hidden and so on, and put some print messages in there and run your code and see when these different actions are fired. Right? It's not a bad way to explore. But I happen to know that we want state changed for our spinner. So let's do a print message here. So it passes a change event called arg0. And if I look at arg0, there's nothing too useful in here. I can't actually get the value of my spinner. Well, let's just do this the easy way. So our spinner is called spinner. So let's just do spinner dot, and we'll just do get value. And we'll print that out. So my spinner's got a 0 right now. If I press the up button, it changes to a 1, 2, 3. And each time that it changes, it calls that code, and that code can read what the current value is. And you can go down as well. And as with most cases, you can type in here. Right, I can set it to 42 and go from there. Getting the idea? Right, so these are all components that you interact with all the time whenever you're dealing with, any kind of modern program. But we can tap into all of these actions, and we can write Java code to do whatever we want. Right, so we're learning Java, but we're learning this framework of objects that let us do things like this. Right, and if we know that spinner is a JSpinner and we look at the documentation for a JSpinner, there's a getValue method, and it'll tell us, returns the current value of the spinner, and so we know to use that. And all of these, we can also take the argument that's passed, and we can say get source, and in this case that would return spinner, and then we could use getValue on that. So you got multiple ways to get in. All right, other things we can do. So here's a text area. Let's add an event handler component. Let's do, what do I want? let's just go for the J-frame. So J-frame, add event handler. Let's do component resized. So here's my code. I can move my window around. If I try to change the size, I'm going to get that event triggered. And when I first ran the code, that event got triggered also. There we go. When you first run this, you get some event saying that the frame's been resized, right? Because when it's first created, it's given an initial size, and we resized it. And so these events can be called by the system itself, or they can be called in response to user actions. But if you didn't want the window to be resizable, or you wanted to do something snarky, right, every time that the window is resized, you could do something. You could change the size to snap it to a certain amount, or you could move your components around if you were doing your own layout, or you could, you know, choose to do something else. You could put a maximum on the window size, and if they resize it beyond something, you could shrink it down, or whatever you choose.
Did you make it run away from them as they were trying to click?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I had someone do that once. It's like click here, and every time you get to it, it like jumps. All right, so let's look at mice. So let's come into this little text area down here, and let's do mouse entered. So there's mouse entered. And let's do mouse exited. Uh-oh. See, all this stuff supposedly makes you more efficient, and I'm sure it does if you're used to it. But obviously I'm not used to it because I normally turn it off. All right, so we're hanging out here in our J-frame. If I move the mouse into here, I get an event saying that we just entered this area. And if I leave, I get a message saying we exited. And I don't have to click in here. And this box might have focus, but if I enter in here, it'll tell me I haven't changed the focus, right? But I'm picking up those mouse events. And I could shift my focus into here, doesn't matter.
So you can make like a really annoying text box that gets in your way no matter where the mouse is.
Mm-hmm, sure. Yeah, or just
Those
like,
stupid you want a vacation things.
oh yeah, totally, totally. You like misspell Google or something. Yeah.
Just love it if you turn that in for a PA.
Yeah. Well, this came up one term, and we started talking about annoying interfaces, and so people tried to come up with the most annoying interface possible. And one was like where you had to enter a certain key, but the numbers kept changing like every like half second, so you had to like find the right one.
Just press all the keys on your keyboard.
Yeah, yeah. But it-
Borderlining on virus creation.
But if you get the code wrong, it bonks your files. So.
I'm pretty sure that is a virus.
Yeah.
That sounds like, what was the Turing thing? The German.
Oh yeah, the Enigma,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, so the codes are just changing like every
Mhm.
second.
So let's do mouse clicked. So we get a mouse event, E, and if we look at its methods, it's got things like get X and get Y. Right, and so we looked at these the other day. But I can click in here and get the coordinates of wherever I'm clicking. But more generally, so let's go into our content pane. Let's add an event handler. Let's add a mouse motion, mouse moved. So every time we come into our mouse moved event, we're just going to print out the X and Y values that we get from the argument that was passed to us. And now we got, like, anytime you move the mouse, we know what the coordinates are. And
Is this in the window?
this is inside the component, the content pane in here. So it doesn't happen outside, and it doesn't happen on the J-frame itself. And it also doesn't happen if we're inside one of these components, but it will up here.
Is bottom left 0, 0?
Upper left will be 0, 0. It's another cheap video game. See how close you can get. Hey, I got it, I win. Yeah, yeah. Right, so we've got some code here, and we haven't really written anything except a bunch of print statements, right? But we have code that's, like, you know, acutely aware of all kinds of things happening here. Right, and there's a lot of code that's been generated. We're up to 172 lines of code, but most of that we didn't write. Right, most of it was created in response to drag and drop, and we really just did the print lines. So there's some gotchas. So this content pane, for example, we could try to add an event handler for key presses. So key pressed. All right, so we'll print out the get key car. But sadly, if we do that, nothing happens when we type. And so sometimes you do need to go read the documentation, right, or Google. And first level of what you'll find on the web is usually not bad for this stuff. If you're Googling and you find yourself getting, like, deeper and deeper, and you're getting into, you know, lambda calculus expressions and all kinds of weird stuff like this, right, you're probably going down a rabbit hole, right? But how to capture keystrokes in a content pane will bring you pretty quickly to what you need. And in this case, a content, so these things have properties associated with them. And one property is whether or not something is able to capture focus. In other words, is it allowed to grab keystrokes? And by default, a content pane is not allowed to capture keystrokes because it's really a container in which you put other things, right? But we can change that. So when we construct our panel, we can say gym.is focusable and set that to true. I forgot the California spelling. It's set focusable, yeah. So we can say that Jim's allowed to capture keystrokes, and now if we type over here, right, you get our So there's details that will come up sometimes. But by and large, right, this is pretty straightforward. And when you work with this set of classes long enough, swing classes, you start to understand, the commonality. So I know how to pick up a checkbox. I probably know how to pick up a toggle button, right? I can look for state changed. I probably know how to deal with radio buttons, right? When you go to a different set of widgets, right, a different class, it may have a different set of actions, and you may have to learn what those nuances are. So if you're in Android Studio, you have a different set of widgets. It's not swing, but it's basically the same thing, right? You drag and drop, and there's a layout manager, and you can say, run this code when this action occurs, right? And if you can design things in Swing, you can design things on Android, and you can design them in IntelliJ with some other package or NetBeans or whatever else. So the time you spend learning this, right, it's like learning the PIC processor in Engineering 270. You may never use a PIC processor again, but if you switch to an ARM processor, you already know most of the concepts because it's not that different from one to another. Same thing with windowing classes, right? And this is just one set of classes for doing GUIs. But a heck of a lot more control than we ever had with Zenity, right? So Zenity was really, really kind of a high level, and this can be as low level as you want. Yeah.
I was curious, so like I noticed when you right click in Java, you have a customized.
Yeah, like a context menu.
Yeah, so you have like what probably your computer would have, like probably the top part or the bottom part, but then somewhere in the middle you'll have what Eclipse is going to provide you.
Yes.
Is there a way to do that with these windows? Like if you right click on one of these windows, getting like a curated list of things you can do?
You can set that up. So let's try that. So let's come up here and let's add a mouse event, and let's do mouse clicked. And let's just print out this mouse event E. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to click, and I get all of this stuff out. Oh, I got too many things on here. There we go. All right, so what did I get? I got XY positions inside my window. I got absolute XY positions relative to the upper left corner of my whole display. I got a button 1, which tells me this is a left click. I got modifiers, so if I hold down Shift and I press, I'll see something different in my modifiers, and so on. So let's go up here and let's right click. So right click, well, I didn't have to do that. Right click, it showed me button was 3, and the modifiers was meta plus button 3. If I click the scroll wheel, I get a button is 2, which looks like an alt button. There's button 1. If I do control in button 1, it tells me control in button 1, and shift in button 1, and so on. So inside my handler, I could check the button, and if it's equal to 3, then I could pop up a small window with some options on it, and that would have its own code, right? And how do you create a new window? You create a class like bubbles, right? And you just say, bubbles variable equals new bubbles, variable dot set visible true, and it pops up, and you can position it because it's got position methods, set position, and so on. So you can make it so the upper left corner is where the mouse is, and so on and so forth. And all of this stuff, there's very low level ways that you can do this. You can reinvent the wheel, but there's also higher level ways to do this. So I may have told you my very first Java code that I wrote that did all of this windowing stuff, I didn't know how to use any of these things, right? I didn't know about swing, so I did everything like at the lowest level possible. And not only was my code huge, but it's completely unmaintainable. I mean, it's been around for 20-some years, but I can't edit it because it'll break almost certainly. So for example, I implemented Scrollbars manually, right? If you clicked here, I moved everything down and stuff like that. You don't have to do that, right? If you've got a class like this, you can make a scrollable window. There's a field you can set that says make it scrollable, and put a scroll bar on the side, and they'll talk to each other, and they'll automatically make it so your text moves up and down and so on. If you select stuff with the mouse, it'll highlight, and if you control X, it'll cut and things like that. So a lot of the stuff is done for you, and there's ways to pop up context menus that will make your life easier. All right, so before I forget, side note question. As part of my tenure process, I put on my plan that sometime this quarter I would give a talk to the department on some relevant area of modern interest. So I was considering doing some Friday afternoon, like a 45-minute quick intro to doing Android development. Is that interesting to anyone? Okay, I may do that. I'll figure out a schedule and probably like announce it in the club one of these days, and it'll be, I don't know, a few weeks from now. Just some Friday afternoon, maybe like 12:30 or 1 o'clock or something after club meeting. We'll find a time that works. But I recently dusted off my Android knowledge, and when I first learned Android, everything was done in Eclipse, right? It was a plugin that you would put into Eclipse, and now everything's done in Android Studio. It's their own interface on top of IntelliJ. And it's another example of using, widgets, classes that are built for you, and something like Window Builder that you can use to drag and drop instead of writing all the code yourself. But if you learn the basics of it, and the basic life cycle of an Android app is very different from a C program or a Java program, right? Your code basically runs from the time you boot until you shut down. It's always there. If you learn some of those basics, then it's pretty easy to take everything we're doing here and carry that knowledge over to making apps on a phone or a tablet. And I suspect doing the same thing for an iPhone is probably a similar translation of knowledge. So it might be useful. Okay, cool. Well, I'll figure that out and let people know ahead of time. All right. So any questions about this so far? And again, we could go through all of these and we could look at all kinds of different interactions. That's not my goal here, okay? My goal is to show you some of the highlights, right? Getting to action events and looking at the arguments and getting you comfortable with the idea of, if I come down here and there's a mouse event, I should be able to come into the class definition and find things that I want in here. So when I try to find out what the button was, right, I know if it returns 1, that was the left button, but I don't want to code a magic number like 1. There's a field called button 1, right? And that's set in this case to the number 1, but on some other system it might be something different. So I could say mouse event dot button 1, and that would take the place of a 1. Same thing over here where I coded this magic number 10. That's not what we want to do. Okay, don't put magic numbers in. This is really arg0 key event, so it's getting a key character from key event. So if you look at the key event class, there's a bunch of these fields, vk underscore 0 through 9, accept, add, and so on, and down here is a vk underscore enter, right there. And it is an integer, okay, but it's an integer that's equal to whatever the particular value is for an enter key. So in here, instead of saying 10, I could have said the following. Key event.vk underscore enter. Whoa. listening to my mouse clicks. Okay, like that. Or not.
You're missing a round marker with the new key vector. Yeah, on line 120,
Oh, yeah.
where you wrote the V.
Oh, I got myself a world of hurt here. Let's see if I can control Z all the way back.
Oh, you got rid of that braces.
Yeah, I'm doomed now.
This is just what happened to me when I was taking notes and I had to give up.
Yeah,
Oh, it's broken, Fred.
yep. Well, that seemed to clear it up.
One thing I've learned from this class is just to give up, don't try.
Yeah, exactly. That's the take-home message at the end of
Sure.
week 10.
Just submit to the.
That's what your diploma says. All right, so glitches notwithstanding. All right, that should work. I don't know why it's complaining about system out print line. Something I was going to say about that. Yeah, so one thing you learn is keep backups, right? But yeah, I'm really disappointed with Eclipse right now, on Linux at least. I'm going to try an older version tonight or tomorrow and see if that's more stable. And if it's not, I'm probably going to get a Windows laptop. Run it on there, because at least it seems stable.
It'll last a couple years.
My Windows laptop is already a couple of years old. But this is weird. It's like I'm scrolling now, but it's not actually scrolling. It's just moving the scroll bar. So let's close this out. Try this again. Maybe I should read all these error messages that pop up. I don't know. Hey, I can scroll. Hey, I don't have error messages. And do I still have... Okay, I still got my VK underscore enter. All right, so we're good. All right, other questions, comments? Yeah,
I was
yeah,
just
sorry,
gonna
you had your hand up 10 minutes ago.
It's all good. I was just wondering if you could show, like, if you press a button, you should be able to pop up a whole new window of exactly what the first one was. You know,
Yeah.
the first bubble. Is that hard, or?
Making it look exactly like the first window is going to be tricky. Popping up a new window is not hard, right? But
You have to make the second screen look exactly like that. You couldn't just pop up a similar screen.
so when we construct a new, so what's our main program doing? It's really just creating a new bubbles and making it visible. Kind of seems like it should work. So let's try that. So what should our magic key be? We'll do Z. Our first comment. We tried this at the break and it wasn't working the way I expected it to, because it didn't have all the components and I don't know why.
Can you clone it? Like use a dot clone or something?
You could. That might be interesting.
You do it infinitely and
Well, yeah, we can blow up our stack pretty easily. It's easy to blow up your stack in Java, actually, because it's a lot more overhead. So let's see what this does. So I'm going to sit in here, I'm going to hit a Z, and I'm going to get my new frame, but as I thought, it's missing all of our components.
Let me press Z again on that one.
That'll pop up another one. And then some of our stuff came back. So,
Each window pops up another component.
yeah.
Well, it looked like when you hovered over it, it showed up.
Yeah, so they're there, and I'm wondering if we need to get into super already. Because when we construct, all of this stuff is happening. Yeah. I don't claim to understand right now why it's not doing this. They're definitely there, but we got to do something too.
It's like a fine.
This is my third video game, man. Yeah. Hunt the Wumpus.
It's the whole Office package.
Yeah. All right. And yeah, we can redo that from either one. Yeah, when each of these has a close, exit on close. So if we close any of them, the whole thing's going south. But if we get rid of that, then we can make multiple windows, and we should be able to close one without affecting the others.
We need to close our original first.
Still won't exit. In fact, there's no way to exit now.
Perfect.
Yeah, but we can terminate.
So what do you do in that case if you're just totally, like, the thing you created is out of control and you need to kill it?
So if you're in Eclipse, right, your stop button will stop everything.
Oh, okay.
If you're on the command line, you're running this, then you can Control C, right? So one thing I can do, let's say file export, Java jar file, and I'm going to export that. I'll call it haha.jar. Our main class is bubbles. I don't know if this will work or not. What the heck, it's effectively Friday, so let's try it. There we go. So we can run this from the command line just as well as from Eclipse.
Did you make it pop up in your web browser when you browse something to a certain address, like your local host?
Those questions worry me from you. Make it pop up in your web browser. Like if someone else is browsing, or like on your own machine?
Like if it was on your own machine, for example, like those Java applets.
Yeah.
I agree or whatnot.
I don't know if there's an easy way to fire code from a website anymore. But I mean, it's just a command, right? Java-jar. Or if you're on Windows and actually you have a jar file like that and you double click it, it'll run it. So maybe. You can probably fire it from JavaScript, I would think. So yeah, there's nothing magic about Eclipse other than it's giving us this, I was going to say annoying, convenient way to write our code, and window builder and all that. But the end product, this class, right, will just run on whatever system you have. But you could put this jar file on the server and run it, and it's not going to work, right? Because we can't do graphics across a PuTTY session by default. But we can set that up and make it work. So you could actually run this on the server and it would display this. But what do you need to do to make that happen? You need a tunnel of some sort. Right, here's Linux, engrcs.com, that's the server. Here's my bubbles code. And over here is my laptop. And I've got a connection over here through the web, or the internet. And I'm hoping that this code is somehow going to draw a frame and draw a button and all this other stuff on my laptop. Well, if that was easy to do, that's a big security problem, right? Because first thing you do, you just clone something that looks like the person's desktop and you capture keystrokes and all that stuff, right? So you've got to set up some authorization and a mechanism so that this thing running over here is allowed to create graphical objects on your laptop. And the easy way to do that is something called X Windows. And we'll play with X Windows at some point before the course is over. And that'll let us actually run things on a remote server. And that's a generally useful thing to be able to do. All right, play around with Swing, play around with some widgets and such. We'll be using them in PA3. Play around with PA2 while you're at it. I'll play around with new versions of Eclipse. I'll have a solution for you on next time. All right, so I'll see you then.
So why do those